Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm senior literary agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bierce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nikki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
Welcome to Wayward Writers. We're excited to talk with Aje Roberts, who is a senior commissioning editor at TOR Bramble. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit more about Aje. Aje Roberts is a senior commissioning editor at TOR Bramble. Her first publishing job was at Century and Arrow, Cornerstone, Penguin Random House UK, and after that she worked at Quercus Books, a publishing division of Hachette UK. Aje previously worked at One More Chapter, the digitally focused imprint of HarperCollins UK, as an editor. And she also completed a year-long secondment at Harper Voyager from 2023 to 2024. Aje has worked across commercial fiction, genre fiction, and science fiction and fantasy. She has worked with authors such as Elizabeth Helen, Amelie Wen Zhao, R.F. Kuang, and many more. She loves all genres, but her favorite is fantasy, romantasy, spicy romance, and webtoons, manhwa, manga.
Indeed.
All right. Awesome. So we are so grateful to have you with us today and to learn from you and understand more about romantasy and all of those wonderful things. So first off, I know it has become its own genre, but didn't exist at one point. So for our listeners who don't know, which my mother is one of them, can you define romantasy for our listeners and how it's different from fantasy or fantasy that just has a romance in it?
Sure. Yeah, I would say romantasy's probably been around for a long time, like people call it fantasy romance or romantic fantasy, but because of the nature of TikTok, it has changed and obviously become really, really popular. But romantasy is essentially a book that is fantasy but has a romantic main plot or subplot, but the romance is driving the plot. So the romance is the focus, but you've got maybe a secondary world with amazing fantasy world building. But again, the romance is what drives the plot rather than the fantasy world or political machinations. But you'll have that as like the window dressing, which I say window dressing, but like the amazing window dressing that is very important. And in terms of plot, it can sometimes just be lower fantasy or it can be high fantasy, and it can be lots of plot with a little bit of spicy smut, or it can be mostly smut and less plot. But yeah, it really depends. But that's what I would say defines romantasy for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you think romantasy has to have a certain heat level to be considered romantasy?
I don't think so. I think obviously the readers love spice, the romance readers, TikTok readers really love spice, but it can still be classed romantasy without having spice. Again, it's that romantic plot
Right.
that's the romantic thread that's forwarding the plot. And I think a lot of times you can have slow burn and yearning and those tropes of romantasy without having any spice at all. I think sometimes it can even be sexier when you've got like the tension, the yearning, the lingering looks and touches. Like if the author's written it really well, you can have romantasy without spice. And also sometimes romantasy, when it's slow burn, you'll have a series and there won't actually be any spice till like 2 or 3 because the author like leading you up to that,
making you wait.
So yeah, absolutely, you can have romantasy without spice. It's just commonly, I'd say, known for its spice.
Yeah, and you mentioned TikTok redefining it, which we definitely saw. Do you think TikTok is the reason for its explosive growth, or do you think that that was bound to happen?
I think it's probably it's probably a few things. BookTok specifically is like word of mouth on speed. You can't finesse the algorithm as much as you might want to. I think if publishers figure that out, they'd be very happy. I think, again, you can't finesse the algorithm. It's what catches fire is what catches fire, and it's very authentic.
Right.
And I think that's why the readers like it, because people will just share their thoughts on books. And then if a book catches fire, like Quicksilver or Blood of Hercules, Beast of the Briars, any of that kind of book, that's when obviously publishers will start to take notice as well, because it's going really wide. But I think probably it's a combination of things like TikTok and also things like Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros,
Right.
because those are really very popular romantic
Right.
books. And I think that's also bringing in readers who maybe weren't reading before, and they start. And I kind of call Rebecca Yarros and Sarah J. Maas like the gateway drug into like fantasy and romancy, because they'll start there and be like, okay, what else is in this genre? And then maybe they might find like Brandon Sanderson or something more deeply rooted in genre. And also, I think because there's such a close connection with romance and the spicy romance going really popular on BookTok as well, I think that probably fed into things, because then people talk about their tropes and like the MMC, how book boyfriendy he is, and that kind of all goes
Hmm.
hand in hand with romance as well. So I think it's probably a few things, but I would say the majority of it is coming from BookTok, I think, because it just got so big and really brought things into people's consciousness in a way that it hadn't been before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big key to it that I noticed like early on was that there were just this whole new audience that weren't readers before that it really brought in, which I think is amazing and wonderful. And I love how organic it is. I
Mm.
love that it's just real and people just talk about it. I feel like this situation was kind of an unknown to editors and publishers before. Do you think that there are other common challenges for writers and editors that are working in romantasy?
Mm, I think probably the common challenge now is, because it's so popular and the market is saturated, is how are you bringing a point of difference to your romancy? You don't have to
Yeah.
reinvent the wheel, because it works very well. Romancy readers, and the same with romance readers, they will consume very quickly. They read what they want to read. They'll go for the tropes that they want to go for, whether it's morally grey, villain gets the girl, whatever it is, their favourite trope, they'll be like, what book has this? I'll read that next. So I
Mhm.
think it's, yeah, the challenge is, how are you bringing a freshness of voice, or how are you subverting tropes or reader expectations? How are you doing something a little bit different, or bringing a creature that's different? Because obviously dragons are really, really popular, but one of the most
Right.
recently, one of the books that went viral on BookTok was Direbound, because it's using direwolves and it's got kind of like a
Mhm.
connection to Game of Thrones, and it's very different. I've never read a book with direwolves, and that gets people excited as well. So I think the
Right.
common challenge is finding a way to break through the masses and the amount in the market to make things popular or successful. That's probably the biggest challenge for everyone in the romantic market at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your favorite part of editing romantasy?
I mean, I think it's probably, I'd say, my favorite part of editing in general is just like seeing the book come from acquisition to publications. I see my role as an editor as like someone who's helping bring the author's vision to life. So I'd never dictate,
Mhm.
you know, what I think it should be done. I always say to my authors, like, what I've said is suggestions, and I want them, like, the things that I say, to get their creative juices flowing, and then they're like, oh, this is a really good idea that's come off the back of what I've said. So I think my favorite thing about Romantasy is, or editing Romantasy and editing in general, is like pulling out those character arcs, the love lines, the tension, the romance, and just seeing the book flourish and become its best possible version of itself. And I think that's like really fulfilling for me as an editor as well. But then it's also really fun to work with the authors and to also fangirl the main girl character, and want to be the female main character, because I'm obviously a fan and a reader of this genre as well. So I'm coming to it from
Right.
obviously the business side and the editor hat, but also I've got my reader hat on, and it's fun to read as well and work on.
It is fun. It is fun. I love being one of the first people to read the books, you know.
Yeah. When people are like, oh, what are you reading? Like, what are you reading that's good? I'm like, well, I'm reading something that's not come out yet, but maybe in 2027 you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, do you think there are any like certain tropes that are kind of rising right now or any that might be fading that are overextended?
I think very popular tropes at the moment are things like villain gets the girl, shadow
Mhm.
daddies, morally grey characters. I think sometimes people can complain about them like female main character being a bit of a wet blanket and being a bit of a victim to her circumstances. So I feel like, badass or stabby female main characters are definitely in. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of sort of romantasy and TikTok and BookTok is all forwarded by women, and I'd say it's very sort of women-led or female narratives that people are responding to. And I think also it's like men written by women. In the world we live in, it's hard enough to move through as a woman, and sometimes things like dating and dating apps and all those things are like not fun. But when you're reading
Right.
a man who's written by a woman, you're like, she knows what I want. This is like my perfect man. This is my good boyfriend. So I think that gets people excited as well. And it's like a
Yeah.
reclamation of female like sexuality and power and things like that as well. Because they say like men watch porn and women read porn, but it's like you're
Yeah.
able to have that escapism and enjoy reading something that takes you completely out of the world we're living in today, which isn't always a pleasant place. So it's nice to have that escapism and also that community as well, because you've got other female readers who are loving the same thing as you. So I think those are probably the things that are rising. In terms of things fading, I'm not sure if there's anything particular that's fading. Maybe having blonde MMCs isn't as popular. Everyone likes,
There's a lot of them.
yeah, a dark-haired male main character at the moment, or white-haired male main character. But I think in general it's cyclical. So the tropes and
Yeah.
trends will be trending and in trend, and then they'll go away and come back. And so I don't think there's really anything that's fading. I think there's just what is the most popular at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of BookTok? Because I have a lot of my authors. I mean, we have people in the Wayward Writers community who really don't like TikTok much. So, are there pros and cons for readers, writers, publishers, editors?
Yeah, I'd say there's huge pros because it's really given self-published authors a chance to shine, whereas they probably were
Yes.
working more under the radar before, but because of TikTok, because of BookTok, it really gives people a chance to discover these self-published authors, and it's obviously given these
Yeah.
self-published authors a chance to move into traditional publishing or hybrid publishing if that's something that they want. I have talked to indie authors who I've been like, "Are you interested in potentially traditional publishing?" And they're like, "No, I'm indie through and through, and that's how I want to stay." And I completely understand that. I think self-published authors have to wear so many different hats.
Yeah.
They're not just writing the book; they're marketing it. They've got to know their audience, so they're basically doing every part of the process that you would have a
Yeah.
publisher doing and helping you with. So in that sense, indie authors really know their audience as well, and they usually have a built-in readership and they have a platform that they've built. So I think it's a really big pro because it can help you get your book out there, whether you published it before, you published it already, or you're going to publish it. It's a chance to get your book out there for readers and build a platform, and it's also a chance for people to find books that they may not have found before. I think maybe the only cons with BookTok is it's not always as diverse. So I think
Mm.
it's if you the I think it's the same problem just in terms of publishing across the board, and it's probably a symptom rather than a problem. But sometimes you don't find the most diverse recommendations on there unless you're specifically looking for them. Like if I'm just looking for, say, a morally grey villain who gets the girl, and I'm looking for that on TikTok, the majority of it will be a white writer or white characters. So if I'm specifically looking for something with, say, a black FMC, I've got to go looking for it rather than it
Mm-hmm.
just falling into my lap. Although obviously with my algorithm and the people I follow and things like that, it's more likely to come up on my page. But
Yeah.
I think people who aren't as linked into that or interested in that will just be finding what the run of the mill what's out there. So I think that would be the only potentially con. But again, I don't think that's a TikTok problem. I think that's just a publishing problem. But I think,
Yeah.
yeah, for publishers, it gives us a chance to see writers who have a platform or things that are doing well that we could potentially traditionally publish. So I think it's definitely overall the pros far outweigh the cons. It's a really obviously it's fun as a reader because you find those ways, but as a publisher, it's good. It's a good litmus test to see the readership, what they're enjoying, what's going viral, and why, and what's doing well and what's trending, and how can we use that in our marketing or in our publishing and things like that. So I think it's definitely a very interesting, yeah, it's a really interesting platform and learning curve, I think, essentially for publishers because it's make us think about things in a different way, which I think is always good. You've got to be flexible, right?
Yeah,
That's how you change the learning
absolutely.
environment.
I mean, I think that's one of the problems with publishing in general is that it isn't very flexible usually. I think that's changing. It's a forced change kind of in a way, but
Mm.
I do think that publishing is becoming a little more flexible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
But
most things move at snail pace in
right.
publishing. So I say that's the same for finding intersectionally diverse authors and platforming them. But I think, like
Yeah.
you said, things are changing. And I think a lot of those things do have to do with TikTok, but also people actually paying attention to commercial fiction and romance rather than being like snobby about it, where they're like, no, I only read Booker Prize winning authors. And like, that's absolutely fine if you
Right.
do. But there's nothing wrong with commercial fiction, and the reality is commercial fiction is what makes the majority of the money or the most of the
Yeah.
money in publishing as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's an outlet and a safe space for people to be like, I love romance, this is the book I'm loving, rather than people
Yeah.
turning their nose up at it. So I think, yeah, it's
Well, and I think because it didn't start out as a literary space,
mm,
and I think so it gave people the freedom to just be themselves and still find things that they loved. And to me, that's the benefit of book talk, is that the origin of it was just people finding what they loved, no matter if it was literary or of high literary quality. I mean, to me, if people love it, that's great, right?
exactly. I
Um,
think if you can
yeah,
tap into something that people are going to fall in love with, then I think that's more
yeah,
important. Obviously, like
right,
everyone takes different things. Like something I will cherish or want from a writer or a book, somebody else might think isn't important because it's such a subjective like business,
right,
and reading is just so subjective and personal. So yeah, and I think it's also interesting because books like A Little Life are really also popular on BookTok, but that's just not the era of BookTok that I'm on. So I think
right.
it's depending on what you like and what you enjoy, you can find lots of things. So there are literary books that do also go viral on TikTok, but personally that's not
Hmm.
what my algorithm is going to show me. But yeah, I think
Right.
offers you the option, like you said, it's organic and authentic. So it allows you to just find what's out there that you're drawn to or you would want to read.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Maybe nobody can answer this, right? The same way nobody in publishing seems to be able to answer if a book is going to sell well. But what do you think makes a book um, book talkable? And secondarily, do you think that writers should pay attention to that and write with that in mind? Or do you think that we shouldn't be paying attention to that?
I think it's twofold. I think as a writer, knowing your audience and your readership is very important. And that's something what indie authors who are on TikTok do very, very well because they know their readers, they know exactly what they want. But I wouldn't say writers should write with that in mind. I think it's more, again, knowing your audience, knowing the people you're wanting to reach, but not changing something to be like, I'm going to write this specifically to go viral on BookTok because that's not authentic and that's likely not going to work.
Yeah.
So I think it's writing what is authentic to you and what you want to write, but just having
Hmm.
that awareness of your readership. And in terms of what makes a book talkable book, I feel like, yeah, that's the $1 million question. If we knew, that would be great. But I think it's like
We would all be
probably
doing it.
certain ingredients that are more likely to make something book talkable or go viral on BookTok.
Yeah.
For example, the male main character, is he like book boyfriend material? Are people going to swoon over him and
Right.
like be like, this is my husband? Same with the female main character. Can readers relate to her? Do they want to be her? Do they love to hate her? Like what's going on there? Like that's going to get people excited.
Hmm.
But then it's also like the world building, the situation, the plot, like how hooky it is, those things that are going to get readers' zeitgeist, that are going to get people excited or want to talk about it, and things like that. Things like The Hunger Games is a perfect testament because it's still going viral on TikTok now. Obviously, Suzanne Collins is writing new books, but those kind of ideas
Yeah.
that are just so good that people continue to return to them. I think those are the
Right.
kind of things that would make a book talkable. But if I do
Yeah.
find the answer to the question, I'll probably patent it first, but then
Yes, you would be wise to do that. That's, to me, that's the key of most social media, but especially TikTok, is that you have to go on there and be authentic. You have to go on there and say, this is me. this is what I love. And then it's going to feed you things that you love. And I think that if you are like you're a fan of these types of books, so then that's what you're connecting with. And that's why the community works, I think. So navigating it authentically. And wouldn't you say that there are certain genres and types of books, though, that do have a stronger community on
Oh,
BookTok, don't you
yeah.
think?
Yeah, I would say the romance community is probably the biggest on BookTok, and by
Yeah.
proxy, the Romantasy community, because I think, again, there's such a large intersection between the two. So I'd say, but also my view might be warped again because of what my algorithm shows me. But I would say the romance, and like the spicy romance,
Right.
and contemporary
That's what I've heard.
romance, yeah, those are what I would say are the biggest sort of communities on TikTok and what have been the biggest drivers. And in terms of seeing that like in a quantifiable way, that's the area where publishers are paying the most attention and acquiring self-published authors. So I'd say that's probably the biggest community. But yeah, I think the beauty of TikTok is there's a community for everyone, and like you said, it just depends on the size. So whether you've got a really niche thing that you're into, there's likely going to be at least one other person on TikTok looking for the same thing. I think it's
Yeah.
there's so many different communities, and there's so many Venn diagrams and cross sections of things that cross
Right.
over. But yeah, I think the communities are there. It just depends how large they are, which will dictate, I guess, how much attention that they get. But I think there's something for everyone, which is really good. And I think as well, like we keep going back to authenticity, the readers or viewers will see right through you if you're not being authentic. They'll see right through you, and they'll just know like that you'll have a book talker who's got a similar taste to you, and then you'll continually watch their videos. You'll take their recommendations,
Right.
and then you'll read what they're talking about, and then publishers can recognize that and then tap those influencers to help promote their books as well. So it's like a again cyclical relationship, like I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. We've actually had on the podcast The Bindery, which is a publisher here in the US that works exclusively with influencers who have their own publishing houses
Oh
or
wow.
imprints, really. It's a pretty cool system, and
Yeah,
that was a really fascinating episode.
I'll have to check
Um
it out. That sounds
it's actually a really cool, and their books, they just had their first season release. I think at the beginning of this year, and beautiful, beautiful books. Um So, if I'm a writer and I want to get on Book Talk and promote my books, what are the first steps?
I would say leave your ego at the door. Honestly, it's just like, a lot of things get in people's way and they're like, oh, I can't make this or I can't do this. And it's like, you're your biggest hater. You're just standing in your own way. Like, I always wanted to start
Mm,
creating content to do with books, but I was like, no, I'm too busy, or I don't know how to work TikTok in that way. I only use TikTok to like scroll and stuff. And you can learn and you can just do it, and it's user friendly. So you just get on there and start, and you'll find your readership, or your readership will find you. And it's just, again, just being authentic. Talk about the things you love, talk about the books that you
mhm.
love, but also realize that TikTok works with trends and things like that. So jump on the trends, do things that are popular, use the trending sounds. But yeah, as
Interesting.
a writer who wants to grow their platform or talk about their work, just talk about your work, but also talk about what's similar that's done well. Like, people just love comps. What's done well that's similar, or if you love this, you'll like this. It doesn't have to always be books. It can be TV shows or anime or those
Yeah.
kind of things. And create your aesthetic, create it in your mind. Basically, you're making things really easy for readers and you're handing it to them on the plate. Like, if you loved Diabound, you'll love this book because the FMC is a badass. She's really stabby, and we've got cool serpents in this, like a different creature.
Mhm.
Those kind of things.
Mhm.
That's the kind of thing that you want to do, and also talk about your own taste and your own things you like to read, but also what's inspired the book. Like, those kind of things, like just your journey, how you've got here. Like, that's what people enjoy and will connect to. And I think if you're a writer and you're building your platform, just do that and don't be self-conscious about it, because I think obviously, I think the human condition, we always want to look good and things like that, but it's like,
Yeah.
forget about that. Just have fun with it, and
Yeah.
you'll grow your following and your readers will find you. So that's my best advice.
That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. Do you think that there's a difference between the UK and the US as far as TikTok goes?
I think probably I would say the US definitely leads TikTok and BookTok. I think because your market is just massive compared to
Yeah,
ours. I think there's just
it
so
is.
much more out there. So I do think the US definitely leads trends in terms of what's happening on BookTok, but I think there's also different tastes in the UK and the US market. Sometimes things that do really, really well in the US or are runaway successes won't get traction in the UK, and vice versa. So I
Mm,
think there are differences,
interesting.
and yeah, I think like on my TikTok, I'd say I've got a mixture of both like US and UK creators, but also people from Europe as well. I think definitely in Romantasy, I think again, it's just there's a large number of books in the US, and I
Right.
think that leads it. But then I also think like things like covers, there's the perennial conversation of who does better covers. Obviously, I'm Team UK, but things like that as well. So yeah, I think
Mm,
the markets are different, but largely there's a massive crossover, which is why usually things that are doing well on US BookTok will do well on UK BookTok as well. Or in the UK market, it's all the same BookTok really, but things that are doing well on BookTok and selling well in the US will likely do the same in the UK. So yeah, I think it's definitely a lot of
interesting.
learning we can learn from UK from the US, just again because the market is just so massive and there's so much more going on. But yeah, I'd say probably there's a lot of exchange of information, or oh, the US is doing that, that's interesting, or the UK is doing that. Things like even subscription boxes, we're now seeing the
Yeah.
US do their own like print runs with sprayed edges and things like that. Then the subscription box market that we've made really successful in the UK work for them.
Hmm.
So I think that yeah, things like that yeah will do well,
Yeah.
not in both markets.
Hmm. So, we've talked before about publishing intersectionally diverse authors and that this is one of your key priorities. First of all, I would like the audience to understand what it means to be intersectionally diverse because I think a lot of people don't get this. I have actually said, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'd love to see in my inbox. And people are like, what is that?
Yeah, no,
So, let's have a little discussion about what that means.
yeah. I mean, there's that I can't even remember the person who came up with that sort of the actual like term intersectionally diverse.
Yeah.
So if you want the actual term, Google it. But I think in terms of like what I see when I think of intersectionally diverse is that people are never one thing. So I think when
Hmm.
people talk about diversity and inclusion in books, they'll think, okay, well, let's just find someone of a different race, an author of a different race, and that's diverse. When actually it's like no one is ever one thing. And so if you're looking for something intersectionally diverse, it might be by a black author, but it might also be by a black queer author or a black disabled author or a black author who's neurodivergent, plus size, those kind of things. And that's what I see as intersectional diversity. So it's not just one thing. So it can be an author who's representing various different lived experiences. So it's seeing things in 3D rather than 2D and just be like, okay, well, this author's black, so box is ticked. It's more like, well, what are their lived experience? What are they representing in their books? And that's what I think is intersectionally diverse. So not just looking at
Hmm.
different ethnicities or cultures, but also different lived experiences that are part of the human condition, essentially.
Yeah. In other words, real people,
Yeah.
the real people that are out there. I do feel like sometimes we do see more cardboard cutout type of main characters, and
Mm,
it's not realistic, really. Just before this, we were having a conversation about the fact that often underrepresented voices have a lot of barriers. They still have a lot
mm,
of barriers. And
mhm,
unfortunately, I have seen that as an agent. I have seen that with author friends of mine. And it's easy to look at someone who is diverse and is successful and say, oh, it's not true.
mm.
But it is true. I think it is still very true. So, what barriers do you experience, or do you see your authors that you're trying to acquire? What do you see happening in publishing, in traditional publishing?
Yeah, I think it's like we've touched on this in our conversation already, but I think part of the problem is just, oh, there's so many problems. I think
Well,
it's a multitude of things. I think as editor. I think the problem starts with publishing traditionally was a very white, middle class, upper class thing. And to this day, those are the roots that are still very prevalent. I think
Yeah.
things like the starting editorial assistant pay or junior pay for like people who are wanting to get into publishing is very low, and also it's very centered around London. So if you're working class or you can't live off of 20 something k a year, which frankly who can in this economy, like
Exactly.
publishing isn't exactly going to be something that you're necessarily wanting to come to. That it's not, basically it's not accessible. So you're finding that a lot of
Yes.
the from the pool of editors, and I focus on editors because they're the people who are acquiring, but obviously we want
Right.
diversity across the board, and it has to start like grassroots up. So if you're not having editors who are of different lived experiences, people like go for their comforts. It's just human nature. They're going to go for
Yeah.
things that they find comfortable, and often the times if you've got a white editor, they're going to go for a white author because that's what they're represented. Obviously, I'm not trying to disparage people in general. Like, people are more aware depending on who they are, who they hang out with. Like, do they have friends from other cultures? All these different things. But if you're looking at like the cookie cutter problem, it's because people are just not from different lived experiences. And then I think on the other side as well, same thing with agents. Agents are amazing. I love agents, couldn't do my job without them. But oftentimes they'll not always send me the most diverse things because, again, most of the agents, I know the majority are white as well, because it's not just the publishing
Yeah.
industry is not super accessible for anyone from underrepresented backgrounds for the various reasons. So that's part of the problem, is getting even getting the diverse books to even come across my desk is like
Yeah.
really hard. And I think because with big five publishers, obviously we don't accept unsolicited manuscripts unless you're like reaching out to authors yourself. So then again, you're looking at what's coming through your inbox, and the percentage of it that's like from underrepresented authors is very low. Not to say that like agents aren't making progress in this area or are intentionally, you know, making leaps and bounds in this area again, but like things move very slowly, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so we are improving, it is progressing, but obviously at the rate that it is, it's not like fast. We won't see these kind of big changes probably for at least 10 years, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's part of the problem. And also, if it's not your top priority for something to be intersectionally diverse, you're not going to go looking for it either. Because if I just sat on my hands and waited for someone to hand me what I want, then I'll be waiting forever. So I have to go looking for it. I have to go finding the authors. I have to go talk to self-published authors. I have to reach out to agents and be like, this is specifically what I'm looking for. So I think that's part of the problem.
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, there's just in general people's unconscious biases as well. There's like the old adage that if you're black, you've got to work twice as hard to get half as much and things like that. And I think people are just much more likely not to give underrepresented authors the benefit of the doubt, that
Hmm.
if they're writing, like, there's plenty of people who are writing mediocre books, but that are doing well or getting published, but not necessarily for the underrepresented authors as well, because of the majority of publishing, the authors have been white, and that's the comps, and that's what people are looking for. Sometimes people get a bit confused when you're publishing something that's by someone who's underrepresented or intersection diverse, and they're like, well, how are we going to market this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that?
Yes.
You treat it the exact
That is
same
something I have
way.
seen.
Yeah, and the people
Yes.
get really confused and get really stuck in there because of a lack of education, and it's sort of a deadly cocktail of a lot of different things. It's like ignorance, unconscious bias, and just in general the status quo and what's been going on, and people feel like again, publishing works of what's done well in the past, so how can we replicate that success? So I think that's
Hmm.
lots of different things, and then underrepresented authors can just really fall through the cracks. I think sometimes they're just not given
Yeah.
the priority by the publishers, or they're not giving the marketing spend, or they're just not given the attention that they need. And that also doesn't help, because if you've got a book that's coming out that has a huge campaign behind it, a huge marketing spend, and people are really excited, then that's much more likely to do well than a book where people aren't giving you any marketing spend, aren't putting any effort behind it, and you're just the editor who's like trying to get a book out, and you're like, this is really good. Like, your passion and enthusiasm and the writing isn't necessarily going to sell the book. There are plenty of writers I know who are like fantastic, phenomenal writers the best writers that I've ever read, and they have like no readership. They've not sold books because they've just not been
Mhm.
given the opportunity. I think because the playing field is not level, it it just means you're on the back foot from the very beginning, which makes things really difficult.
Yeah.
Really unfortunate. It makes me really sad. It's not a hopeless. It's not hopeless. Is I think to end it on like a more positive note. It's not hopeless. There are editors who are going to champion you. There are agents who are going to champion you. There are readers who are going to champion you. Whether you're finding your readership in the self-published arena or if you're coming to traditionally published, I think it's just there unfortunately are barriers for anyone who's underrepresented in life. It's the same
Mhm.
in publishing, but that doesn't mean that your writing doesn't have value. It doesn't mean that you're not worthy. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're not deserving of having a publishing deal or having that success. It can just be more difficult because that's just how we have to navigate the world. But I think again, it's finding if you can find an editor who's going to back you or an agent who's going to back you, be your ride or die, your time will come. And I think it's just not giving up and
Yeah.
don't let the bastards get you down. That kind of thing. It's like you've just got to keep going because your readership is there. Your readership is out there. It's just finding them. And again, I think that's why self-published authors are doing so well on BookTok, because sometimes you're looking for something that you can't find in the traditionally published spaces, but someone
Yeah.
who's already self-published it. I mean, it's that Toni Morrison quote: "If there's a book that you want to read but it's not been written, then you must write it." Like that. I think
Right.
that's one of my favorite quotes. That's just the really important thing. It's like there are your readers, they're out there, and just because the sort of traditional publishing isn't necessarily paying attention doesn't mean that somebody else won't. So I think there are lots of barriers, but again, there are also lots of readers who are really looking for intersectionally diverse books, and that's what they really want as well. So I think it's just a case of the publishing industry obviously having to progress and change. And it's one of those things I can't think about too much, otherwise I'll just want to scream into the void. But yeah, there are barriers and it is difficult and it's frustrating and annoying, but also
Yeah.
don't give up because you're worthy of the success that everybody else has.
Yeah. I have found that I have several underrepresented authors on my list and put them out. Like, I just love them and like the world building, the imagination. I love these books and I'm trying to get them out. And I know it's not intentional, but so many times I just hear I'm just not connecting with this voice.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you're not necessarily going to connect with this voice because it's not from the same culture as you. It's
Mm.
not from the same background as you. But it's still such a phenomenal read,
Mm.
you know? And that is, I think for me, that's the one thing that I have struggled with most with my underrepresented authors that I represent is trying to beat that. Like, it's not, maybe it's not going to be this super commercial book that, but maybe it would. Like, you don't know that. But publishing is so risk averse that
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like we're afraid to step outside the complete norm, and that's really tragic because then I don't know. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on the
No,
subject.
I fully agree because I think also again like there's because there's not as the like diversification of the editors as well isn't as diverse as
Yeah.
it could be. The first time I remember reading a book about someone who looked exactly like me, so my mom's black, my dad's white, so I'm biracial, black mixed, and the first time I read a book where like I had the character had the exact same thing, like the same, their mum was black, their dad was white, and they were mixed, was when I read Noughts and Crosses. The author will come to me. I know Mallory Blackman.
That's okay.
Thank you. It was one of the Noughts and Crosses books, and I was like 13, and that was that still stays with me now as a 31-year-old. That's the first time that I can like pinpoint and be like, I read a book and the character looked exactly like me. And having that representation is just such a beautiful, transcendent thing. It just makes the book even more special. Like some of my most favorite books, the characters don't look like me, and that's totally fine because I connect to them in different ways, like character traits and things like that. But I think there's less
Yes.
of an openness when it's the other side, because if every book you read or you go into Waterstones and pick up in the book, the person on the front cover looks like you, then you take it for granted. Whereas when you don't
Mhm.
have it, you're more aware of it. So I think it's like an
Yeah.
awareness, and people are like, yeah, I'm not connecting to the book. And it's like, do you have any black friends? Like that might
Right.
Like even just small things like that people just aren't, they're in whatever circles they're living in, and that's the circle that they've lived in their whole life and they're comfortable with, and that's what their
Yeah.
lived experience is, and it's just not very expansive. And I think then people can just be like, yeah, I didn't connect, it's not very familiar to me, but it's like, but actually to your readers it would be. So I think it's the awareness of
Right.
the editor, and the editor being in that mindset of I'm wanting to read things that are outside of my lived experience is very important. So I think again, if
Hmm.
you've got the agents who are backing these authors, you also have to have the editors who are going to be like receptive to it. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So I think it's, yeah, I think also it's just an element of education and looking at unconscious biases, looking at things that, again, like you said, publishing is risk averse. You know, we do a lot of this is done well,
Yeah.
so let's, you know, replicate that success. So I think it's being able to say, okay, this is something a little bit different, so let's lead the market rather than just follow. I think it's, yeah, it's
Yes.
it's a lot of different things. Um, but I'll be very hopeful
Yeah.
for the future and hope that, you know, things look a little bit different in, even if it's just in a year's time, 5 years, 10 years time. But I think we're making the right steps. It just, yeah, again, these kind
I
of
agree.
changes you don't see overnight, even if you
Yeah,
would.
I agree. So I take conscious steps to do this with my authors. What are some things that maybe I'm not doing that I could be doing? Or maybe what are some things that editors or even authors could be doing to help champion one another and diverse authors?
I think authors are really good at championing each other and finding that community and talking about each other and lifting each other up, which
Mhm.
is really, really lovely. I think it's one of those things where it's finding what's going to connect, whether it's like comps, TV shows, books, but also I think it's knowing your network as well and knowing like who you think it's really going to connect to and things like that.
I think it's an awareness, like you were saying before. It is an awareness of just opening your mind and always looking and always being aware and finding ways in the everyday.
I
It's
think
the everyday.
Yeah, I think it's putting aside performative allyship and actually educating yourself, and being ignorant of something isn't like a
Mhm,
sin, isn't a bad thing, but being willfully ignorant of it is different. So it's like being
mhm,
aware that, you know, you're going to have unconscious biases, or you're just going to have things that you're not aware of that are like the things that
mhm.
you don't know, but being open to be educated and hearing from underrepresented
Right.
authors or editors and people with a different lived experience and hearing them out and being like, okay, actually, that's changed the way I think about this. So I think it is down to, like, in the publishing industry, we've got to do the work, like in like publishing companies, we've got to do things like training on unconscious bias
Yeah.
and all those kind of things, and listening to the members of the community who are talking from there. Like we have networks, most publishers do, but we have networks at PAMAC. Like we have Rise, which is our network for sort of underrepresented races and things like that. And then we've also got our Pride network and all those kind of things. And it's like listening to those underrepresented voices when they're telling you things and allowing yourself to be educated and, yeah,
Mhm.
having that openness and
Yeah.
awareness and that willing to take things on from different lived experiences, but also the willingness to take a chance or not see it as a risk, I think is also important, because I think as soon as people clam up and they're like, oh no, we don't know anything that's done well that's similar to this, then you've lost them. So I think it's like giving
Right.
people a reason to say yes, and making it
Mhm.
easy for them. People are also so busy and they've got so many things going on. Like, make it really
Yes.
easy for them. Put it like, hand it to them on the plate, give them a reason to say yes, or give them a reason not to say no, kind of thing. Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things from different sides that need to be done. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any recent or upcoming books that you can think of that you're excited about that have this intersectional diversity in them?
Ooh. I think in terms of like authors off the top of my head who I'd say I look for, or I know who do things like that I really enjoy, I'd say someone like Candice Carty-Williams. Like whenever she's got a book coming out, I'm really excited. I think she's her next book, I think book 4, they're like working on that now, and when she posted about that I was like, oh my god, there's going to be a new Candice book, things like that. And authors like Kimberly Lemming I just love, and I think there's a lot of authors who are really making strides in this space as well, like RF Kwong. She's really like a mover and shaker in this area. So I think it's, yeah, it's that there's a lot of books that are coming out that make you really excited. And there's also a lot of people who are supporting and platforming these kind of authors. Like I'd say Fairy Loot and Illumicray are also really, really good
Yes.
uplifting marginalized authors, which is fantastic. So I think there's so
Mhm.
many books out there that make me really excited. I think off the top of my head, I can't think of any that are coming out unless they're the ones that I'm buying and acquiring and putting out there. But yeah, there's so many authors. Again, I think there's so many things that I don't even know. I don't know. But when I see them come across my algorithm or I see them in a bookshop, then I'll be like, oh, that's amazing. That makes me really excited. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot
Yeah.
out there that is to be excited about and a lot of things to be hopeful. And there's just things coming out every month that you see and you're like, oh, this looks amazing. And so I think it's just having that awareness to look for it and know that it's coming to be able to get
Yeah.
excited about it as well.
Yeah. And have an open mind. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's also like you'll have your comfort zones and things that you read that you go back to again and again because you know that's you're going to get that serotonin that you want from it, like that happily ever after or the formulaic romance or all the things that you want. But I think it's also like being able to step outside of your comfort zone and read something that you wouldn't necessarily think might be your thing. In like my publishing with my submissions, I say to agents, I'd actually rather see it than not, because I know what's in my comfort zone, I know what I'm going to enjoy, but also sometimes there are things that might take me by surprise that I'll read and be like,
Right.
hey, that's amazing, I really love this. So I think it's being open to also reading stuff that's like outside of your comfort zone or your creature comforts that you're going to love and enjoy
Yeah.
as well.
I think that's why my list is so eclectic, is just because things hit me and I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. Different perspectives, different cultures. I love it all.
Mm.
So, how did you find your editorial niche in romantasy, romance, and diverse publishing?
I really just have focused and honed in on what I want as a reader, and that's how I found my niche. So I've worked in commercial fiction for my entire career, and from my second job I worked in fantasy as well. So I've worked like the majority of my career also in fantasy. I think when I went to Harper Voyager and did my secondment, I was like, okay, I've always been a reader of fantasy. I've always been like a watcher of fantasy in terms of shows. These are all the things that I enjoy and love. Back in the day when Cassandra Clare was coming out and Twilight and Maze Runner and Divergent, all those things, like those are all the books that I was reading. So when I did my secondment and I was like solely focusing on genre, I was like, I actually really love this and this is what I want to do. But then I've also got such a big love of romance as well. So that's why, Tor Bramble was just like the perfect job for me, because also I'm focusing on fantasy and genre, but also with a strong romantic thread, but also being able to do contemporary romance as well. So that is what made me really excited. So I think I found my editorial niche by just honing in on what I personally love and
Yeah.
what is already like in my area of expertise in terms of being a reader, and then I've turned that into my career.
What a dream.
Yeah, I
That's
know,
awesome.
right?
Thank you so much for being with Wayward Writers today. It was so fun to chat with you.
Yeah, it was great fun. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.